and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Richmond, Virginia. My name is Denise Rhymes, and I serve as president of this congregation. It brings me incredible joy to welcome you this morning from the Great Hall as we begin taking baby steps to a time when we can all be together again. Our church was begun over 180 years ago as a liberal Christian community. We now are a community of many faith journeys and beliefs united in a single covenant of care. Through the years, we have struggled and often succeeded in the mission to seek personal wisdom, build beloved community, and serve the purpose of justice in the Richmond community. If you are visiting us today on our YouTube channel, we welcome you and thank you for spending time with us. And we hope you will return to YouTube very soon and perhaps to the Great Hall in the not too distant future. Every service is a little bit different, our ministers are unique, and our music changes all the time. The best way to discover who we are is to spend time with us over several Sunday services. We welcome you to this time of worship.
We will now light our candle for our chalice this morning with the words by Sonia Renee Taylor. We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, distraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature.
It's the same, but it's not. It's the same as Zoom, but it's not. It's the same as being here, but it's not. But we are glad to be with you today and to welcome you to service. It may not seem very different, but it is. We are in the Great Hall. It is 11 o'clock, and we are live. And that will be different. During the pandemic, we have spent much time together in differing places. in the study here in the building, in various corners, and I mean corners, where we had to speak to avoid some echoes and reverb. And from my backyard, and from the study at Reverend Sherman's home, we've tried to be present to one another, but now we start the path back. We are not welcoming folks for service yet, but this is the step that begins it all. And next week, we'll begin a partnership with the Eno River Fellowship of Durham, North Carolina. The Durham congregation has been our sister congregation. Our boards have worked together, our committees have consulted one another, and our ministers, for sure, have been on the phone to one another. Did you ever run into this? We have counseled and loved one another, worked on anti-racism together. We've feasted and celebrated ordinations and installations. And now, in this year, both of our congregations will be bidding adieu to their senior ministers, the Reverend Deborah Kerr in Durham, and here in Richmond, to me, the Reverend Jeanne Pupke. There's a sort of symbiosis to that. And so we've decided once a month to share a service with one another. In our usual way, we'll be taking on tough topics, but we'll begin next week with our Altars of Remembrance service, which you'll learn more about later on. We're happy to share with our sister congregation, our sibling congregation in Durham, and we welcome any of those who might find their way to this service to thank you for trusting us to do this together. Our service today undertakes a major thought. Have we mourned? For many of us, we've been only too aware of our privilege during this time of pandemic. We may be one of those families in which no one caught the virus. Everyone got vaccinated. There was no disheartening conversation anywhere in the family. We may not have young children. We may have the means to order takeout and our groceries delivered. We learned early in the pandemic how very different this epidemic was, because in many places, families were hard hit with the disease. Some have lost loved ones. Our institutions, such as our skilled nursing facilities, have been hard hit here in the community. And we saw many a tragedy, including the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. We've also learned lessons. But today's service discusses the need to mourn, that as human beings, we must mourn if we are to remember how to be human. And so we begin our first streamed service, our live service today, by preparing for next Sunday, when we will gather to establish our altars of remembrance. More on that to follow. But I have what is absolutely a heartwarming privilege, which is to say that 6 of our UU singers are here to be with us. Dee Whittington is a long-term member, came back to us after some years of a little bit of being away. And Carl Fisher has never left. Arnold Woodruff's been here, I think, 20 years singing. And Tamara, Smith, I almost did the wrong Tamara, came here about 8 years ago. Tamara, is that 9 years ago? Helene Meadows has joined our choir some 20-something years ago. 83, 30-something years ago. 38. And Phyllis, I think you're just about that number, maybe earlier. 79. So we have great singing voices here to be with us. And they are masked, and we long for the day when that won't have to happen. They are led by our interim acting music director, Jamie Kilpatrick. And so I'm happy to have these musicians with us today because the sound of music is a beautiful gift in this great hall.
Precious day, for all gathered here and those far away, for this time we share with love and care. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day. For this precious day, for all gathered here and those far away, for this time we share with love and care. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day.
Our first reading this morning is by Mark Ballatini, titled Grief and Depression. 4 months after Stephen, my best friend, died, I went into a deep depression. Oh, I had wept plenty and went through some stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross once outlined, and a few she didn't include in her theory, too. But in May, one of her 5 stages settled in and stayed. Week after week, I found getting out of bed in the morning almost impossible. As if anchors were holding down my limbs, I was totally depressed. At the office, everything seemed trivial to me. Letters, meetings, parish problems, social functions, and even dinner with friends, all trivial, unequal to the grayness that stole all the color from my life. At mid-afternoon, I would often sleep or go home early. I would preach on Sundays, yes, but in those days, I didn't spend time writing sermons. I just crafted them on the spot, linking the readings I had chosen with a few stories. I was alive while I was leading worship. I could manage that. But the rest of the time, I was a ghost. The depression felt physical to me. I thought if someone drew my blood for a medical test, it would simply weigh 3 times more than usual. Everything inside me felt sluggish. The bright California sun, the sparkling East Bay sunlight, no less, seemed wan and dusty. When people asked how I was, I would say, okay. But even then, I knew I really never fooled anyone. I imagined they thought I was trying to reassure them that I was slogging through it. But I wasn't. Some days I didn't want to live anymore. I had buried so many friends in the preceding years. Mark DeWolf, Frank Siskowski, Alex Stevens, my beloved John Zimmerowski. But I knew my depression was not just a cumulative thing, but was grief for Stephen particularly. Why live in a world without Stephen? I would ask myself, what kind of a world is that? Stupid world, ridiculous world, empty world. I would lie there in my bed, the iridescent May sun outside, delighting every other person but me, I imagined. I could think of 100 reasons to get up, but only one, to stay in bed, and that was the loss of Stephen, and so I stayed, under the covers. I spoke with a therapist, then with a few good friends. I walked along the beach. I read the great poets, especially Rilke. By mid-June that year, the depression, it began to ebb. I began to see Stephen's death as one with all others I had experienced, and somehow that larger view lifted me out of the trough of May and into a summery light. The Oakland sun thrilled me again as it splashed across the windows at Rado's in downtown Oakland, or painted Lake Merritt the perfect color of tangerines just before sunset. I felt grateful to be alive again. But since that day, when someone speaks of their depression, I immediately feel the physicality of those gloomy days and wonder if what I felt then resembles what they are feeling now. But I'm fortunate, I know, now because it only lasted a few months for me. And as I said, though, I am no longer as depressed as I was 18 years later. Every February 14th, I still light the yahrzeit, the anniversary candle memorializing Stephen's death. The living flame reminds me of two things: the aliveness of my love and the reality that all things change, even Stephen, even me.
I invite us all into a time of meditation, an opportunity for reflection, to recenter ourselves, to feel in our body our breath, and to share this as a moment of reflection together. I'd like to share with you a text from the New York Times. I'm not trying to suggest it's sacred scripture, but it was so profound an article I thought it would make its way to this pulpit, and it has. It's from Kat Eschner. The title of the piece was called "The Years We've Lost to COVID," from April 21st of 2021. And this is just a piece from the introduction. Anna Carter would be 14 if she were alive today. She would be finishing 8th grade and growing her savings account by babysitting for neighborhood kids. In a year, she would have started high school. That would be this coming year. And in 2 years, she would get her driver's license. And that's where her futures start to blur, but after all, 2 years is a long time for teenagers. But Anna died suddenly last July in an emergency room of the Comanche County Memorial Hospital in Lawton, Oklahoma. Her mother said, "We checked in at 6:15, and by 8 o'clock, my husband and I were walking out without her." She was the first child to die of COVID-19 in Oklahoma. Most people lost to this pandemic in the United States are much older, but on average, each victim lost about 9 years of life, according to a study from the University of South Florida. Each death represented years of lost time. Anna lost 3 or 4 trips to the mall every month with her sister Sophia, countless hours practicing hip-hop and the opportunity to start jazz dance, and eventually she hoped a big family like hers, where she grew up with 4 siblings, would be what she would create. There's a whole life that will not be finished. And for the past year, experts and journalists have struggled to express what COVID-19 has taken. But health statisticians are increasingly using a calculation called lost years of life, which counts how much time the victims would have lived if they hadn't have died. It helps to determine which communities were hardest hit. And looking at the lost years shifts the focus from death to the life they might have had. In 2020, the United States lost around 4 million years of potential life. We're now at about 6.5 million. Sweeping our country clear of all that those people might have been and done. And it's such a big number, we don't have the mental capacity to process it, said one study author, Miko Misgrava, the director of the Max Planck Institute. The life insurance industry would translate these years, particularly before retirement, into dollars. Public health experts might call them the burden of disease. But they are lost lives and opportunity to raise a family, to build a home, a business, or to be a part of a community. We are all now skilled in the numbers, you and I. We know about infected, vaccinated, dead. We can reel these off for our county, our state, for the country. More than we wish, we have followed the trajectories, the maps, the colors. And all of us have made decisions about what would be risky, too risky, not risky enough to avoid. There were those who saw what happened simply as a matter of fate. They went about their business as they had. There were those who went about their business as they had because they had no other choice to do so. And others who found it difficult to follow guidelines, either forgetting or intentionally forgetting. And those who denied even that there was a virus are all a part of our communities, all a part of our families. We learned as people that we could control, to some degree, what was safe, and we knew how burdensome it was. We've all now learned to carry our masks in one way or another. I personally have to put it on a string. Otherwise, I'll find myself without it too often. What we are now is trained in the art of pandemic. And we were not born to be trained in the art of pandemic. But with international travel, such as it is, we will ever more, I think, be vulnerable to it spreading amazingly fast, unlike the Black Plague, which took totally about 13 years to work through the populations. The summer surge that came with COVID-19 peaked in September. And then we held our breath to know, was this moving toward a new, quote-unquote, herd immunity? But we are not made for this. We are not good at keeping our distance, refraining from hugging, staying home, avoiding risk. We're not good at it because we're good at being with one another. Now, none of us can go back to the world that existed before the pandemic, but we are at risk of trying to. Maybe you, like me, have fantasized about the Sundays where finally we would all be back together, and known intuitively that some people may not return, that others will not allow us those hugs they used to, that still others will keep their distance and their mask, and they may feel to us less close than those who don't. Wherever I think into the future, I find that I'm a little disappointed by that, but I'm more disappointed by the fact that as we went into the pandemic, I actually imagined that we were a people who, when under attack, could come together and rally. I think it's because the generations before me went through the Second World War, the First World War, and somehow came together to fight a common enemy. And I remember learning in my psychology class that that is what is necessary to unify people, except we didn't get the memo. The generations mixed we have now don't get it. And so we will be changed forever because we will carry with us the truth that we did not come together as we ought to have done, that we could not agree on the public health, that we would not undertake procedures to protect the children. We suffered greatly because of it. We're not equal to it because we're not prepared as people in some basic and fundamental way to share enough of an identity to care about one another, even in the most general sense. And this has made me very mad, sad indeed. I would say I had grief over it. I am a minister, and I wanted everyone to come together, but some naive portion of myself had to be vanquished, as it has by this pandemic. And yet I must say that I know that as individuals, when asked to help, we help generally, Not just 9 out of 10, 19 out of 20, 99 out of 100 will help. And yet, when we put on the big meta version of who we are, we fall into indifference. In the New York Times article that I read, it goes on to talk about how difficult this time has been for some groups over others. I know you know this, but I read this statistic in this article and could hardly stand it. Dr. Mary Bassett, director of the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard University, found this, that between March and June, 4 months, March and June of 2020, Black Americans under the age of 65 lost 4.6 times as many years of life as white Americans. 4.6 as many times years of life. That is a stunning statistic. For Hispanic Americans, the number was 3.2 times as high. And yet, I don't know that it's any different today or will be tomorrow. The losses among younger people in these groups were even more lopsided, as much as 9 times higher than white Americans. So as we mark the decline of the infection rate, the increase of the vaccination rate, and the decline and great diminishment of death due to COVID, the danger of COVID is not over. The grief needs to be done, because until we feel the inequality, until we mourn the deaths, until we understand how we failed, there is no going forward on an honest basis. We were told that we would move toward herd immunity, but we disappointed ourselves, so we need to mourn. We were told that this disease was profound, and yet, if you are the right person with the right hospital and the right doctors, you can be good. Just look to our former president's treatment. But if we do not learn to mourn everyone, vaccinated, unvaccinated, Black, Hispanic, Asian, if we do not learn to mourn the young, the old, the preteen like Anna, then our humanity shrivels if we will not face up to everything that we have lost. Stupid world, difficult world. Now, I chose a reading from Mark Bellatini, one of my colleagues. He's retired from the ministry now, but I chose it because I think one of the things we can learn for this pandemic that is instructive to us is from the gay community. They answer for me a question of why we need to have altars of remembrance, why we need to mourn publicly, not privately alone, why we need to come together to name what has been lost. You remember the AIDS quilt? Square by square, the lives of those lost to HIV began to become remembered with love and care and tons of creativity by the gay community. Beautiful quilt pieces, beautifully rendered, spoke of the lives lost. And at first it was a thing in the gay community. at people's memorials, in their homes as people were mourning, at gay community centers, in bars. People hung the quilts and together had a totem to mourn. But then straight people started noticing, invited them to bring the quilts to memorials. They were gifted to mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers so that the family would know they were missed and loved and lost and mourned. Soon, there were public displays of the quilt pieces, but the quilt kept growing at such a rate of death that eventually, the second time, the quilt was displayed at the mall in Washington. It took up multiple blocks, and it had become so cumbersome to move them that they declared it would be the last large public display of the quilts. But what we can learn is that by mourning we are changed. When I stood on the mall to see the quilt the second time, I could see what was happening. People who didn't know what was going on, who were just walking by, or tourists, families of tourists, would come by and be taken in by it, drawn in by the color, drawn in by the beauty. They didn't mean to see the quilts, but they could not help themselves. They were drawn in to witness to the sadness and the loss and the beauty. And I name that along with Stonewall and other events, it was on the mall in Washington and in the hanging of the quilts throughout the country, the people began to ask the question, who had never asked it before: why do we belittle these gay people? What makes us think we're so much better? Correct. I don't think we'd have marriage equality right now had there not been the quilts. So that redemptive impulse, that ability to take it apart and to really sit with what was lost, if this pandemic does not move us to grief and tears, what kind of human being are we? Yes, now we have vaccines, and we start to think about taking these masks off and returning to theaters and movies and restaurants and to playgrounds, and we think about getting together with friends and family and flying across the country. But we cannot pretend that is good enough. For we must realize how much sacrifice has been made by parents, by health and medical professionals, by the public health community, the teachers, the administrators. We must name all that has been given to us as food reached the shelves and meals were delivered and restocked and families separated. We must understand how many jobs were lost and how many jobs weren't worth going back to. Let yourself feel it, because only then will we really confront the depths of inequality and loss and injustice and the outrage, separation, the polarization that is a part of what we have been through. If we do not cry together, we will carry it apart, unresolved, disappointed, incontextual. We must mourn it together, and hence we're going to build altars of remembrance. What is an altar of remembrance? Well, this week in the lobby we will have the altars set up. It's just a mountain of fabric on which people will put photographs, or copies of photographs more properly. They will put flowers and pieces of paper with people's names. They will write words of what was lost and how they suffered, of depression, of madness, of economic hardship, and the embarrassment of economic riches. We will do this in whatever form is relevant to you. You can come by Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday and drop off a flower, a word. Our young people have already created their contributions to the altar. And then next Sunday, starting at 10, we will display those altars out in the courtyard and invite anyone who comes by to join us, to place a name on the altar. At 2:30, we will have a ritual closing of the altars, calling of the ancestors, a blessing for the earth, and a burning of the paper mementos that have been there, and the closing down of the altars. And we do this so we will all come together at some point, even if we can only come Tuesday or Thursday, 10 to 2, to leave our memento, to make sure our fingerprints are a part of the altar. It matters not what your theology is. This is an altar of human loss and sacrifice. It matters not whether you have been one of the privileged persons, as many of us are, or whether you have suffered greatly. Because one has suffered, because 10 have suffered, because inequality has been with us, we all must take measure of our suffering or risk losing humanity. So let's not pretend to be the happy-clappy bunch that can get together and move on and all will be well, and isn't it great? We didn't meet this test brilliantly, but there are more tests to come, and just like the AIDS quilt, we might learn to mourn in a way that educates, to mourn in a way that increases community, to mourn in a way that honors our gods, our values, our understanding of how to build community and peace, and how to live in love and accountability. We must remember not just those we knew, but every Anna Carter, every young Oklahoman child, every one in Delaware, every elder in Puerto Rico, every middle-aged business person in Seattle. We must care. And if we do not know how to care, come and let's try to remember together. If we do not mark this place and this time, we will surely return to it. Will you join me in prayer and reflection? God of many names, God of many understandings, none complete and whole and total, bring us together as siblings humbly into this world in which our fractures are seen, our limitations known, and our failures glaring. Bring us together that we might mark our humanity and save our humility and create something pleasing from the ashes of loss and suffering. We must do this to be able to be beloved with one another, to learn to make peace, to step away from the dread of a polarization that marks nothing more than our arrogance. Help us to mark an altar with love and the loss. And help us not to pretend that we know better, did better, but to mark the depths of our failures, the sense of depression and guilt. For the sake of the dead, for the sake of those still ill with COVID, for all those who feel more alone, for all those who need help and may not even be able to call for it. Help us to do this for the children, for all the children, not to go back to what was, but to imagine something better, something of greater goodness and love as has been taught through the ages to us. Let us mourn honestly, incompletely, but humbly. May this be so. Amen. Amen. Ashe. Blessed be.
We do an amazing job in this congregation of taking care of each other, and we also have such a strong commitment to those in our community. Our share of the plate for this month is the Read Center, which stands for Reading and Education for Adult Development. The Read Center changes lives through adult literacy by providing classroom instruction, one-to-one tutoring, and educational resources to adults who need and want to improve their reading, writing, basic math, and digital skills. When adults with lower level literacy develop those skills, they can better fulfill their roles as citizens, workers, and family members. We will now take the collection for Share the Plate, and it will be very gratefully received.
And can work to span the seas if we join in faith together in beloved community. We will know this world as heaven in its love and unity. You are the hope, I am the courage. Together we are more. You are the hope, I am the courage. Together we are more. We can hear each other's story, and its force will shape our own. We can witness to life's heartaches, and we need not feel alone. We can learn new ways of knowing, while our skills we work to hone. We can honor all the journeys and bring all the travelers home. We are the hope, we are the courage. Together we are more. We are the hope, we are the courage. Together we are more. We can keep each other moving on the path however long. We can keep the goal before us of a world where all belong. We can know the earth beneath us as we strive to right her wrongs, as we journey all together in the love which makes us strong. We are the hope, we are the courage. Together we are more. We are the hope, we are the courage. Together we are more. Together we are more.
Before we conclude our service today, I'd like to lift up the Family, Learning, and Multi-Generational Enrichment Program, FLAME, that has just started back outside and in person, masked and socially distanced, which has allowed our younger community members, preschool through high school, to gather together over the past month. It's been just wonderful to be in person again, and just wonderful to hear the choir today too in person. Wow, I can't wait until this continues to grow. If you'd like to bring children or grandchildren today to SOAR 365, the Capital Campaign is actually hosting a gathering for FLAME for our youngest community members with an ice cream truck. And please also encourage families as well to join in our altars of remembrance. And next Sunday afternoon, when that is happening, the children are invited to come in costume and get some candy while the altars are being completed. So now we extinguish our chalice with a poem by Jeanne Olayoa. Don't forget to mourn. Don't forget to mourn properly, the way you don't want anyone to see, wailing, thrashing, heaving with each breath, releasing, purging. Mourn all that you have lost, who you have lost, both in passing over and through, leaving behind an emptiness that draws up and squeezes heartily. Mourn with no regard to place or time, feeling deeply the etching of each second across bare skin, leaving behind canyons to fill. Mourn until eyes, bleary and aching, strain to see. Mourn until your chest unclenches and breath eases. Mourn until your spirit sighs with relief, settles and snores. mourn.
Thank you for being here today, whether you've come from across the country or down the street. We're glad that you joined us here today, and please feel free to invite lots of folks to next Sunday's Altars of Remembrance. This is a community-wide celebration of our own recognition that we need to mourn. I would like to ask all of us now to rise as we are able for a time of benediction, of what we might call good trouble. May you this week note and mark the place you exist now. Take measure of how it is no longer where we began this pandemic. Record for yourself your thoughts, your feelings, in song, in dance, in art, in a word. Do not allow yourself to be incompletely human, but instead allow the world to encounter a you who has learned much and grown, and who is ready to meet the world with love. Amen. 100 years of singing. There's 100 years plus of singing in that row. Thank you.
To